Hello, welcome to my presentation on internal family systems therapy. My name is Kendra Shaw. I am a Master's of Social Work student at the University of Victoria. I'm just finishing my studies in August, and I've been with Strength and Heart as a practicum student for the last year. And through that time, I've had the opportunity to really dive deep into internal family systems. I've done a couple trainings on this type of therapy, and I've been able to begin to practice it with myself, with my own therapist, and also with my clients. And I am really excited to talk about it because it is a type of therapy that is extremely non pathologizing and very compassionate, and it's also extremely uplifting in my experience. So, what is internal family systems? Let's start from the beginning. Internal family systems is a framework for knowing oneself. And this framework understands and recognizes that we are all made up of many, many parts. So we're made up of these parts, and they come together to create our uniqueness. They come together to create ourselves as complex, multifaceted beings. Um, so this approach never suggests that there are parts of us that are bad. It actually explicitly says that there are no bad parts of us, and that all of the parts of us, even the ones that are maybe showing up in ways that are harmful, are there because at one point they helped us survive, because at one point they were created to protect us. And yeah, so throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about a bit more about what IFS is, some of the terms that go with that, and I'll also go through a short example to kind of demonstrate how IFS can work in a therapy session. So, I want to begin first by just acknowledging that at first it feels really weird to talk about ourselves in parts, or at least it seems like it might. The truth is, though, that if you start looking for parts language in everyday life, you'll start to realize that you actively engage in it, and so does pretty much everybody around you, from my experience. So, one way that I see this happening all the time is that myself and others will always say things like, one part of me feels this way, but another part of me feels that way. And we can actually harness this thing that we already do, this way of thinking about ourselves that we already engage in a way, in order to begin to identify which parts of us hold on to harm, which parts of us hold on to hurt, which parts of us hold on to things like shame and blame and guilt, and some of those more painful emotions. And we can get a little bit of distance from them. We can see them as a part instead of seeing them as who we are as a person, as our core. And we can, in that way, by getting that distance, we can offer them compassion and begin to offer them healing. So, this diagram that you see here has a couple categories of parts, and these are different groups of maybe how parts show up for us. So, managers and firefighters are both what we would call protective parts. So, their job is to protect us in different ways. Managers work to protect us by preventing us from having to feel harm. So they work proactively. They may show up as numbing or dissociation. So they say, this is going to be too much. So I'm going to make you feel numb so that you don't have to you don't have to feel whatever feeling is over here that is too much, that feels scary. Firefighters are a part that comes in after we already feel the really extreme emotion or the really hurtful emotion. And they work to make sure, they work to put the fire out, right? That's why they're called firefighters. So, in order to demonstrate this, I like to use an example. And that example is a part of us that drinks, right? So, a part of us that drinks problematically, and that part can actually show up as a manager or as a firefighter. So, the way that drinking can show up as a manager part is that if you drink consistently to stay numb, so you never have to feel the hard things. So, if you just know, a part of you knows that if I stop drinking, I'll have to feel all of the things I've been numbing, so I'm going to keep drinking. So that manages that feeling, right? It engages in this drinking behavior so that you never have to feel the loneliness, the shame, the blame, whatever it is that you're going to feel if you stop drinking. Um, your drinking can also show up as a firefighter, though, right? So the way that it would show up as a firefighter is, let's say there's a part of you that's really sensitive to rejection, and you do something and you feel rejection from that. And that rejection feels impossible to feel. It feels like way too much. You cannot handle feeling it. So, the way that drinking would be a firefighter in that instance is it comes in after the fact, after you feel rejection, to drink so that you don't have to keep feeling it. It puts that fire of rejection out by pouring alcohol all over it. Now, that's just one example. These managers and firefighters don't always use alcohol. They don't always use substance use at all. But those are just a couple examples of the way that they can show up. The other part you see on the screen here are exiles. Exiles are very often younger parts of us. And exiles are these parts of us that have been shamed, that have been blamed, that have maybe been abused, that have lived through trauma. And those parts hold on to so much hurt and so much pain, so much so that they feel dangerous. They feel dangerous to be able to feel them. They feel dangerous for them to be present. So, our managers and our firefighters do everything they can to keep our exiles away, to keep them hidden, to keep them safe, but to also keep us safe from having to feel them. So, in addition to parts, we also have what you see in the middle here is our core self. So, this core self is not a part of us so much as it is who we are at our very essence, at our deepest being. Um, this refers to our innate wisdom, our attuned presence, and the most aligned version of who we are that lives at our very center. Um, One of the things I love the most about IFS is that it says that we can never do anything to lose or damage this part of us, this core self. We can never lose it, we can never harm it. It will always be there. However, it can become hard to access sometimes. So, because of the things we've been through, because of the things we've survived, sometimes this part of us, this core self, can become really hard to find and really hard to sit with because we have so many other parts that are going on. And one of the goals of IFS is that we're able to allow these other things to soften back a little bit so that we can actually access this part of us that holds this healing intelligence, that holds this way of being that lives inside of us that is joyous, that is aligned, that is attuned. And once we're able to access that, we're able to use that energy that lives there in order to offer healing to all the parts of us and begin to live in a way that feels really in alignment with who we are. So, how do we come to have parts? IFS suggests that we're all born with parts. So there's nothing inherently bad about having parts. It's actually extremely adaptive to have parts. It's really good to have parts. Um, Parts don't only develop out of trauma, they develop to help us navigate this wild, messy, imperfect, joyous, sometimes horrible world that we live in and the extremely complex lives that we live. So, parts are not something bad about us. They're not something about us that's sick. They're not only coping mechanisms. Parts are extremely natural. What happens though is that through trauma, through relational and attachment wounds, through societal and structural and cultural harms, and even through harm that can get passed down through our lineage, so through legacy harm or through familial harm that gets passed down to us, we these parts of us, sorry, can become burdened. Um, and when they're burdened, they can take on very extreme roles and they can eventually show up in ways that are harmful to us. But it's important to remember that even when parts of us are burdened, it's not because they're bad, and the goal is never to get rid of them. So if you think about it, we all act in really extreme ways when we're feeling threatened, when we're feeling unloved, unheld, unsafe. I get this image in my mind of a cowering animal who's baring their teeth. It's not because they're a bad animal. It's not because something about them is broken. They're just trying to protect themselves in a situation that feels extremely unsafe to them. They're doing everything they can to survive that. So when parts of us become burdened with these harms that we experience with trauma or with relational wounds and all those other harms that I listed before, then they can take on extreme roles in our systems. And these extreme roles are there originally, at least, to protect us from getting hurt physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, whatever type of harm we're facing. And this threat could be real, it could be a physical threat that we're really experiencing, or it could be a felt threat. So it could be something like, as an infant, not getting the type of attuned presence that we need from our caregivers. There's a reason that that feels like a threat to our infant brains, is because we need our caregivers to survive. So when we're not getting the eye contact, the smiles, the attention that we need, it feels life threatening, and it very well could be life threatening. And even at that age, at that extremely young age, pre-verbally, we develop a part that realizes we need to do everything we can to get and maintain that connection. So to demonstrate one way that this happens, I'm going to use a really simple example. So for this example, I'm going to use a young girl whose name is Ella. So growing up, Ella was repeatedly told that good girls don't get angry, that her anger is not justified, it's not welcome, and that being angry led to being punished, rejected, and excluded. So sometimes she would even be called names when she was angry. Here, there are several types of burdens that are being placed on her and the part of her that's taking these on. And some of them are sexist burdens from society that says that girls and women's emotions are hysterical, that they're too much, that they're invalid, and that there's something inherent about womanhood or girlhood that says that you can't be angry. That's not for girls. Um, there's also relational wounds that are happening when her caregivers are reacting this way to her anger or to a natural emotion that she's feeling. So here you see she's being told that, I won't talk to you when you're like this, or go to your room, think about your attitude, and then come back. And the message that's being given to Ella in these examples is that when you're angry, you're going to lose connection with me. When you're angry, I'm not going to give you love. I'm not going to give you my attention. I'm not going to give you my presence. And that feels like we were just talking about really, really dangerous, at least to some unconscious part of Ella. So, this part of Ella that's at this point probably unconscious because she's so young, right? She's not thinking cognitively like, oh, when I'm angry, I lose caregiver connection and that could be dangerous for me. But that's happening somewheres in her being. And this part of Ella realizes that being angry is not safe. So when she's angry, she loses connection, but she's also met with hostility from her peers. Maybe she's rejected, and maybe she's called names by people, and it feels really, really bad. It feels extremely unsafe. And she's so young that this emotion is quite big for her. It's really hard to feel that. So to protect her, this manager part learns how to suppress, to numb, and deny her anger. So whenever anger starts to arise, this manager part just says, nope, not safe to feel that, push that down, hide that away. The thing is, though, that we can't really numb one part of us without numbing a lot of us. So this might result in Ella feeling kind of an overall numbness. But I want to reiterate that this is protective in this situation. And in this part of Ella's life where she's living in this household, she is relying on her caregivers. She's going to school. She looks like maybe she's going to middle school. Fitting in is so, so important. And not being called names is so important. All those things are so important. So, this part of Ella that's managing that anger is quite adaptive in this situation. So let's jump now to Ella in adulthood. Ella no longer lives with her caregivers. She's self reliant. She has a fully developed brain and the cognitive capacity to realize that anger is sometimes extremely appropriate. It's also extremely useful. And she realizes that anger allows, or it signals her to when her boundaries are being crossed. So it allows her to stick up for herself and to actually maintain connections with loved ones, because you can say, oh, a boundary is being crossed. That's something that we need to navigate together. She realizes, cognitively at least, that anger can allow her resistance to things that she doesn't feel are right. So anger is really important. But this manager part of Ella that developed when she was a small child is still there. And it still works to suppress anger, to numb Ella, to deny her ability to feel angry. Let's say, just for this example, that she also develops a firefighter part. because inevitably we all get angry sometimes. Something will trigger us to feel angry. So when she does feel that anger because of the messaging she got when she was a small child, there's a lot of shame connected to it. Those messages say that anger is not for you, that it's bad when you feel angry, that you're a bad person if you feel angry. So that shame, once she does get angry, floods her, and that feels extremely unbearable. So let's say she develops a firefighter part that drinks to cope with that shame. Um, so these protectors are working in two ways, but we can see how at this stage of Ella's life, they are no longer adaptive. They're actually quite harmful. So the way that they harm her, it's so multifaceted. And one way that we don't think about a lot is that they can harm her physically. So there's a connection between chronic nervous system activation and chronic illness or physical illness. So when she feels angry or when she's trying to suppress this anger, her nervous system is likely activated, and that's leading to an excess of cortisol that's kind of there quite a bit of the time, leading to kind of this chronic stress response. And she's also using alcohol, like we talked about, to cope with this. So, depending on how much she's using alcohol, that can also lead to other things that are happening in the body. And this can lead to a suppressed immune system. It can lead to really poor sleep. It can lead to stomach issues, digestive issues. If you think like when you're really anxious, upset, nervous, your digestion is often not good. It can also lead to things like chronic muscle tension. So, those are just a couple of the ways that this part that's acting in these extreme ways is hurting Ella physically. It's also hurting her relationally because she's not able to express anger. She's not able to safely feel anger. She's probably not able to set healthy boundaries with the people that she loves. And not setting boundaries or having your boundaries crossed all the time leads to resentment, and it leads to disconnection in relationship. Like we talked about a bit earlier, it's really hard to only suppress one part of yourself. It's really hard to only suppress anger. So, because that manager is working so hard to keep the anger down, she's probably also not experiencing the full range of human emotion. She's probably not experiencing those high highs as well as those low lows. So there are ways that it's maybe not allowing her to feel the really low lows that come with anger that feel like shame and blame and guilt, but it's not allowing her to feel elated and joyful and um, fully connect to the people around her. And then that exiled part of Ella, that young child who was blamed, who was shamed, who was hurt, um, also lives inside of her. And those managers are just there. Those managers and the firefighter are there to work so hard to keep that part of her hidden, to keep that part of her suppressed. And that can be quite challenging. So we can see with compassion how the part of Ella that took on this extreme role um, to protect her is no longer working in her favor. It's no longer adaptive in this new stage of her life where she has the cognitive capacity to see how anger is useful. She has the capacity to navigate these situations. She's no longer relying on caregivers. She's no longer in a middle school setting where fitting into that degree is necessary. Um, so it's no longer working really well for who she is at this part of her life. So in IFS, healing happens when either working with a therapist or working with this on your own, you're able to tap into that core part of you, that self energy. And through that self energy, you're able to access things like compassion, connection, creativity, presence, and you're able to give a bit of that love to these parts of us that hold burdens. So instead of looking at these parts as harmful, instead of looking at all of the ways that they hurt, even though they do sometimes, and reacting to them with fear, with hate, with disgust, with just trying to get rid of them, um, turning to them with this energy, with this love and connection, and getting to know exactly what they do for us, exactly how they've helped us and protected us and helped us survive impossible feeling situations. Um, and even sending them thanks for all the work that they've done. It hasn't always been easy. They've had to numb us. They've had to do things that have been really hard. They've had to hide away these really challenging feelings. So sending them thanks, sending them our love and our compassion and our understanding and working with them in a really relational way to truly, truly understand where they're coming from and make them feel safe and make them feel heard. Once we can do that, oftentimes we can continue to talk with these parts, um, and let them know that we're no longer in that situation. Let them know that I'm actually an adult now. I actually have the capacity to navigate these situations skillfully. I'm no longer in that dangerous place. So you don't have to carry this burden around anymore. And that can feel really freeing to our parts. Our parts don't often want to be doing these things. These are really extreme roles. These are really harmful and hurtful roles sometimes. Our parts don't want to take that on. Sometimes they want to be free to do other things in our systems. So, again, through that compassion, through that attuned energy that we can send to them from ourselves, we can allow them to set that burden down and to realize that that's no longer serving them. It no longer has to be their job. We have the skills now. They can trust us to do the navigating and they can take on a different role in our system. So for Ella, if she's able to work with this part, again, maybe with the help of a therapist, maybe on her own, but she's able to get to know exactly how this manager and this firefighter are trying so hard to keep her safe and protect her. She's able to send them her love. She's able to send them her compassion. They might be able to listen then when she says, I've got this. You no longer have to keep me from feeling anger. I know that that was a really important job when I was young, and it's no longer a job that you need to do because I got this. I can navigate anger. And when our parts are able to set down those burdens, they can take on new roles in our system. So that part of Ella might want to use anger in a really helpful way. Maybe that part of Ella becomes her activist side because she allows anger to tell her when something unjust is happening. So maybe that part of anger becomes the part that just sticks up for her in situations where her boundaries are being crossed or when she doesn't feel like she's being listened to. Um, we're also, when we're able to navigate again with this compassion, we're able to access exiles. So we're able to go back to that part of Ella that lives inside of her, that's a small child that really embodies shame and blame and hurt. And we're able to offer reparative situations to them by saying, what you needed when you were little was not to be shamed for anger. What you needed was to be celebrated for the full way that you show up. What you needed was to be taught that anger is valuable. You needed to be listened to. You needed your boundaries to be respected. You needed to be heard when you were angry. You needed to not lose connection when you were angry. That wasn't okay. So we're able to hopefully access that exile and give them some peace and give them the love that they needed so that they are able to also let down that burden and integrate into who we are and be present with us. Maybe that small child, instead of um, holding on to all that shame, wants to hold on to joy, wants to hold on to childlike wonder, wants to do something else in our system. Um, so that's really the goal of IFS, is for us to be able to access the self energy, to send that self energy to all of our burdened parts and allow us to let go of those burdens.